Hello.
Hey, what's up? How's it going, bud?
Oh, fine. Working. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Um,
You should watch
How
his
can I help
Turkey
you?
series sometime, they are really good.
sorry. Hold on. I just watched your video on Trump's biggest failure. Do you remember making this video?
Oh,
Oh, I just realized this was a year old. Holy shit.
yeah, a year ago, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it takes a long time to make videos this time around.
yeah, I was gonna say it because
Yeah.
this shit is like an hour plus long, and it seems like there's a lot of. Do you do like all the graphics and everything yourself too, or do you have people that help you with this, or?
Uh, most of them, yeah. I try to make as much as possible, but the longer the video is, the more I have to rely on help of others.
Yeah, geez. So I kind of have like three questions for you, and
Yeah,
then I'm just
sure.
curious what your perspective is. It was fun watching this video because I have a lot of like problems with the way we approach China, and you summarize like, or not summarize, but you explain in detail a lot of these things, which is really nice. Um, so there's
I'm
three.
ill.
Or go ahead. What?
I'm ill prepared, but
Oh
I'll
no no no
try to
no!
do
You're
my
fine.
best.
You'll. These are. I'm not asking you like what in the 1752. What was China? Blah, blah. So there's like three things. There's three problems that I've identified, and I don't know if there's a realistic resolution to them. So I'm just gonna name the three, and then we can start wherever you want. So the first one is I wonder sometimes if we've solved so many easy problems in society that the other problems left are too complicated to be left to democratic means. So, for instance, negotiating complicated multilateral trade deals, figuring out, like complicated schemata related to healthcare or immigration, like stuff like that. The second problem is the inherent tension between democracy and authoritarianism, where authoritarian regimes can move swiftly and without public support in order to do things that it considers advantageous and over long periods of time. Whereas democratic regimes have to bow to the power of the public. So when things become unpopular, they become untenable politically. And when you have the problem of, and then you have the problem of like having to withstand maybe something that would require like a longer term commitment. You can't do it because of public
That's
unpopular.
that's actually a really big point here. Like
Yeah.
Ayn Ringen points out in his book that a big difference between Western democracies and the Chinese communist state as it is currently set up is that a democratically elected leader will always think in terms of, okay, what can I do within the next 4 years to get re-elected? While the Politburo really thinks in terms of where is the country 20 years from now? Where
Yeah.
is the country 50 years from now? And can think in these terms. But it's not every dictatorship that can think in these terms. Like most think in terms of bare basic survival.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most of them aren't the political and economic powerhouse and geopolitical powerhouse it is China too, right? And then the third problem is I feel like a lot of when people get scared, I feel like they look inward. And I feel like when everybody is looking inward, you're always necessarily going to lose to somebody else looking outward. So, for instance, the world turns into a scary place. Everybody wants to favor protectionist policies. Trump tariffs everybody. The United Kingdom leaves the European Union. Everybody's looking to kind of like stick to themselves. Whereas China is just like shamelessly whoring itself out to world trade, world education trades, to everything they can to expand, basically. These are like the three large, unassailable problems I see, and I don't know, which one of these three do you want to start?
With the trade thing, that is just like I sincerely hope that is something that will just end when Trump is out of office.
The problem,
I'm
I wish it would, but unfortunately, even though Trump takes credit for it, the TPP was pretty dead under Obama. Like even Hillary Clinton had to walk back from it because to the average worker, not just American, but this is true of European workers as well, these multilateral trade agreements always just look like they favor large corporations. That's like the current
and they
impression.
get shut down very easily.
Yeah.
In democratic societies, we shouldn't forget, like CTIP, or what was it called? The Free Trade Association between the European Union and Canada.
I don't even know. But
It got shut down because of Wallonia, which is the poorest region of Belgium. It's not even a known country. It's a state of Belgium shut down this free trade association. And the big benefit that China just has but it's also a big negative if you think about it, is when it proposes its free trade things, first off, it doesn't tie to its democracy. if you want free trade with China, you don't have to be a democracy. It doesn't matter how you treat your citizens. Like, China gets a lot of its oil from Sudan, which for decades was one of the most brutal and genocidal regimes of Africa. It had nothing attached to its trade agreement. It just like, okay, give us oil, we'll pay you. That's it.
What
And just looked away.
On that really quickly, like a really frustrating thing to me. I hate politics. Actually, I hate all of this. Actually, none of this is very fun. One of the things that I read a lot about when it came to the TPP, I did a lot of reading about this because this was a hot button topic a few years ago, was the idea that a lot of people oppose the TPP because we're taking advantage of like poor nations or whatever. There are a lot of like worker rights that were baked into joining this multilateral trade agreement. And as soon as we abandoned the TPP, places like Vietnam immediately rescinded a lot of the worker rights that we had fought for in order to get people to join this multilateral trade agreement.
Well, the thing is also that trade agreements support an economic integration. One of the biggest problems that Chile has, and that's actually a problem that a lot of Latin American countries have, is it's actually a colonial legacy, ironically enough, of the Spanish Empire, which we don't often talk about that empire's colonial legacies. Spanish colonies were built economically in a way where they didn't produce much themselves. They didn't manufacture anything themselves. All they did was mine and then ship that silver, gold, in later years, coffee beans and sugarcane off to Spain to be further processed there and then sold to European markets. And a really weird result of that is that there are less roads, less seaways, less paths connecting, for example, Mexico with Colombia than there are from Mexico to Spain or from Colombia to Spain. So it's all outward directed. There's no interconnection between these.
Yeah.
And a free trade association, for example, between Latin American countries would further an internal integration where, Chile, for example, great example, one of its main exports is copper. It has some of the richest copper mines in the world. It has low labor costs, so it produces a lot of copper, mainly for the American and Asian markets. If you could integrate Chile in an economic system with North American markets, where it can, not only just ship copper out, but ship back expertise, and then build and further integrate the two economies, Chile would prosper. Instead, it just sits in a position where it has to ship out copper, and remains a copper industry.
Yeah, it's very frustrating to me. Like one of the great strengths of the United States, for instance, is the financial integration of all 50 states. If I want to buy a product from another state, I don't even think about it. I don't have to pay like tariffs. I don't have to pay customs. Like it's just
That's a very short thing. That's a very short thing, actually. Like U.S. integration, complete integration, economically and politically, has only really been around since the 1920s. I read this. Yeah.
Wait, but I mean, like for the most part, like interstate commerce was regulated by the federal government since the inception of the.
Oh yeah, but as Colin Woodward points out in his book, who studied the process with which America got integrated and wrote it down in a book, pretty much the official currency in much of Appalachia, throughout the founding of the United States, right up to the 1920s, was whiskey. Nobody used dollars. Nobody trusted the central banks.
Is that true? Well, wait, are we talking like only during the Great Depression? Or I find it hard to believe that in all the 1800s, we weren't trading with currency.
Straight through the 1800s. No, in Appalachia. In the geographic region of Appalachia.
Okay.
People shunned the US dollar and used whiskey as a currency, basically.
Okay, enough people in my chat are saying it's true that I trust you, okay?
Oh, we're live. Okay.
Oh shit! Yeah. Oh fuck! I'm always streaming. Yeah. Sorry. I should have said that at the beginning. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I have the streamer brain. My bad. I just assumed you think that. Are you? Do you smoke?
No, I'm smoking weed.
Oh. Okay. Close enough. Problem. We're not technically talking. I guess so. The inward versus outward thing is something that kind of frightens me. It feels like it feels like when a lot of countries get scared, we have an inability to look outward or understand.
Big thing.
Go ahead.
I think the video is a failure because the big thing that I've failed really to get across is these developments that are occurring in China right now. They're really unavoidable at this point. There's no point in avoiding it. And even if the communist regime collapses and you get a Republican, like there's people in my community often discuss, like, oh, what if China becomes a democratic republic again?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if it becomes monarchy again? And the thing is just, yeah, it won't change what is happening. It won't change these economic developments anymore.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
guess what
there.
I was looking for is like in a perfect world, I'm curious. Because like it could change. Like theoretically, the United States could become a lot more outwardly appearing. The EU could seek to strengthen itself again. We could recognize that having influence in the world can actually be a positive thing. It's not just us being the world police and killing everybody. But I mean, like, are you saying that like realistically that won't happen, or that it's literally impossible even if every citizen were to change its mind about our place in the world?
Like, the worst thing that could happen to China right now
Mm-hmm.
is that its ethnic minorities get enough of the central government and rise in rebellion. Northern China has a very large Mongol population who might have enough and rebel. East China is mainly populated by an ethnic minority called the Uyghurs. Not the Uyghurs, sorry, the Manchu. You have the Uyghurs and the Tibetans in the east, so that could fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that were to happen, the Chinese heartland, which is where most of the industry is, where most of the agriculture is, and where most of the people live, the Yellow River Valley and the Yangtze Valley, that would remain untouched, and that would still be a powerhouse.
So you don't think there's any way to challenge, like, what do you call it, like the Chinese
best
hegemony?
thing
Yeah, go ahead.
the best thing that we could do is better integrate our markets.
Yeah.
Like, why do the phones have to be made in China? That's a question that I have to keep asking all the time. Why not open new markets? Right now, what China is doing, which is really smart, is it's turning Africa into its China. At
Yeah.
least those countries where it has trade agreements. And it's building an interdependent market there where Africans start producing an increasing amount of consumer goods for the increasingly growing Chinese middle class.
Yeah, one of the things I remember reading about a long time ago was all the they're bewildering to the West, but it's all these weird like educational exchange programs that China's running with all of these African countries, where they bring these kids from Africa to educate them for free in like universities in Beijing and shit, and they go back to Africa with a great feeling of China. They are more integrated into the African markets that want to reach out back to China. They like all of that interchange of like knowledge and trade and everything is like carried with them, and it's like an incredibly beneficial relationship for like building like future relationships between China and African countries.
Yeah, and we don't have that. And we
Yeah.
have to also be honest and reconcile with the fact that a lot of what we did didn't work.
What do you mean by that?
think
What we did? Are you talking about like imperialistic stuff, or what do you mean?
Well, officially it was never called imperialism. That's the thing that people always have a problem with. When you take, for example, the US plantation policy in Latin America, that was never officially called imperialism. But the effects it had are almost comparable to imperialism because they were so bad on the economy there. The small discourse on like plantation economies, they suck. Jungle plantation economies in particular, because a jungle is a revolving ecosystem. You know, trees grow, lose their leaves, fall down, and fertilize the ground, etc., etc. It goes in a circle. And what happened, especially in the 1950s in Central America, is that American corporations came in, they cut down the jungles and grew bananas and you know what, and exported these back to the United States and called it, an economic integration, expansion, believing that this would help grow the Latin American markets. The thing is that as time goes by, that revolving ecosystem is dead. And you have to, and that's the case with a lot of plantation economies. That's also one of the reasons why so many West African economies are so poor, because they're based on jungle plantations. Once the revolving ecosystem is gone, you have to spend an enormous amount of your profits on importing fertilizers. And you get enormous expenditures on fertilizers. And plantation economies basically end up being a kind of self-sustaining poverty machine. And that's what the Americans left behind in Central America. That's what France left behind in Western Africa. So we tried this kind of economic integration before, and we failed miserably because we did some really stupid things in that regard.
When it comes to looking at how Trump approaches a lot of these things, they seem to me to be comically ignorant. Like, for instance, like
Absurd.
thinking the purpose of NATO is to just get people to spend more money on military. That's like the main reason NATO exists, or that the main reason trade agreements exist is only to get cheaper products for Americans and no other consideration. Is there
the NATO thing is really the most frustrating, because you don't live in Europe, so you might have not followed the news on this. The result of what Trump did was, we did gear up our expenditures for the future and agreed to further expenditures. And we were about to do something under Obama, we agreed to it, which was NATO standardization. That a commitment that all European and North American armies would, within a conceivable time frame of the next 20 years, agree to all use the same ammunition types, the same rifles, the same tanks, the same everything, to standardize the armed forces for better cooperation and coordination. And because of Trump, the European Union decided, okay, we're going to do our own arms contracts. And we signed these arms contracts mostly with European arms manufacturers. And as soon as we did that, which is what Trump initially said, which was, go gear up yourself and spend more military, Trump turns up in Europe again complaining that we're doing that. Why are you not buying from American arms manufacturers? And it's like, it's comedic, it's absurd. He goes into this with this attitude of trying to squeeze every single cent he can out of everyone and everything. But that's not how you do politics, and it's certainly not how you treat your allies.
And something that you said that I almost that I actually disagree with. It's so crazy too. Is that I don't even think that's how you do business. No. Like, because in some level, I want to say, like, well, maybe he's just approaching it as a businessman. But, like, so for instance, in my industry, I can understand certain things. There are some things called blocking sponsorships, for instance. So sometimes you go around channels and you'll see that, like, a random no-name fuck YouTuber has, like, a Razer sponsorship where they give him, like, Razer gear to just have it on a stream. And like you're in like, I mean, a reasonable person is probably thinking like, well, who the fuck is this guy? Like, this guy's such a small streamer, why does he get it? Well, for every sponsorship that Razer gives, SteelSeries can't give one. So it's like a blocking sponsor. Like, you have people wear your gear just so that they can't, right? And like that same general concept, I think, applies to a lot of foreign policy, where it's like, do we really want to be allies with Iraq? Well, maybe, maybe not. But do we want Iraq being allies with Syria and Iran? Do we want Iraq being, more loyal to China or Russia than us? Like, well, these are really valid concerns. But it seems like people only like, it seems like Trump is so unimaginably uninformed that it can't be. It can't be the case that he's so naive about foreign policy, especially when you listen to, I haven't listened to Xi talk about foreign policy at all, but I have listened to a couple of Putin, like, I don't know if they're speeches, big table shit. I don't know what exactly the conference I'm listening to talk about, but fuck, listening to Putin talk about foreign policy, damn, like he obviously knows his shit, or Hillary Clinton or whatever. I legitimately feel like Trump couldn't find Iraq on a map. Like, I would actually put money on it that he wouldn't be able to identify given the outlines of Middle Eastern countries.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't. And, well, yeah, but, I genuinely believe that this nightmare is soon going to be over.
What?
I genuinely believe
what does that mean? Like, like China's going to run the world, or we're getting a new president, or what?
I think we'll have to pick up the pieces, and that there will be a new geopolitical reality out of that. Like, there's this thing that before Trump, right? In Europe, we had a very far left and a very far right who really liked to cuddle up to Russia and to Putin. You probably saw in American media Le Pen, the far-right French politician, really cuddle up to Putin. Yeah. And we had this very anti-American far left, especially in Germany, that really liked to cuddle up to Putin. And as soon as Trump came in, silence. You don't hear them anymore. Because everyone here basically now agrees that, we have to the east of us a very greedy Russia that would really like to take over a lot of our business.
Yeah.
And
it really frustrates me on like a foreign policy level too. This is something that I took with me out of all when I started fighting with communists and lefties that I was ignorant of until just a couple years ago, to be honest. I'd always bought into the narrative that America, big bad foreign policy guy, we do a lot of fucked up shit around there, blah, blah, blah. I didn't realize that was just, everybody does that all the time.
You should watch my next video that I made after the China one about foreign entanglements, where I go into that.
I didn't know the extent to which the Soviet Union was meddling. I didn't know the extent to which fucking Cuba, which is where my family is from, like meddled in like in South America.
In Angola.
I had no idea. The
Cubans fought a war with South Africans in an African country. A lot of people don't know that.
I don't even know what you're talking about there, no.
In Angola, when the Portuguese pulled out of their colonies in 1974,
Mm-hmm.
a civil war broke out in Angola between two factions. One wanted a communist regime, the others wanted not a communist regime. And as a result of that, the Cubans intervened militarily in Angola. You can Google it, you'll find the Wikipedia page. Yeah, Cuban soldiers fought in Angola. And as a result of that, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, sent its army into Angola. And you had this really long, bitter war. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that Cubans fought a war with South Africa
Oh, wow.
in an African country.
Okay. So inward versus outward. Do you think democratic bodies in a new, more complicated world, do you think democratic bodies can weather long conflicts against authoritarian regimes?
Yeah. No, we know that democratic bodies can.
Let me rephrase this. Can democratic bodies weather long-term conflict with strong and stable authoritarian regimes like China?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, you weathered the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The Second World War.
Yeah, but the Soviet Union, as you pointed out, the Soviet Union never had the unbelievable levels of soft power that China does. The Soviet Union could only dream of being, yeah.
Fair point. Yeah, the Soviet Union struggled at creating spheres of influence, and it tried.
Well, it could, but only
they were
after
like-
marching fucking tanks and shit into places to take them over.
Yeah, they were also completely, in their minds, ideologically stuck. Like, they didn't want to engage with capitalism whatsoever. Like, a condition to fall into the Soviet sphere of influence was to try to abolish capitalism.
Oh, true, because it wasn't until after the fall, I think with like Gorbachev and everybody, they finally started to liberalize their economy and shit more and finally open themselves up. Something that China actually did way prior to the Soviet Union, I believe.
Oh yeah, very nifty. The fall of the Soviet Union was also very interesting to that China, right up to the 90s, right, had a very dilapidated and outdated army, completely outdated equipment, almost from the 1940s and 1950s, that nobody wanted to use anymore, completely outdated. And what happened was, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, the Chinese moved into Russia, where everything was basically on hand for, second hand, and bought up the most modern Soviet technology they could get, like stealth plane technology that the Soviets had themselves stolen from the Americans. That's the reason why the Chinese arms industry is currently developing so fast. It's all based on, they're basically continued Soviet military development.
Okay, well, what is Chinese and Russian relations like today? Because it seems as though they do work together in places like Syria.
That's something I'd like to talk about in a video in the future. They don't really work around. Well, it's China's biggest problem is that it has to go through the Indian Ocean to get to European and African markets. And it doesn't like that because it has to compete with India. So the one big dream that it has, the New Silk Road project, is to build a system of highways and railroads through Central Asia and into Europe. And that would be the best thing for it. But for that to happen, it needs the cooperation of Central Asia and Russia. Now, getting the cooperation of Central Asia isn't hard. You just need to pay a few bribes and you got that. But Russia, even though officially claiming to be supportive of this idea, is blocking it at every opportunity or slowing it down or sabotaging it almost. Like right now, China is trying to build a gigantic highway through Kazakhstan. And it's continuously being slowed down through Russian measures. And the reason is very simple, that Russia sees Central Asia as its backyard. And it doesn't want anyone else meddling in there. And it is very suspicious of Chinese activity in Central Asia.
Sure. I know that during the Syrian conflict, I knew that China was sending like military aid in terms of like training and whatnot. I don't know if they ever did troops on the ground, but I know that Russia had a much more active hand in terms of like actually running bombing missions and stuff down in
Trying to look at Syria, look more at the conflict between Turkey and Russia, because I believe it is more likely that Syria will end up being a Turkish colony within the next, or colony under air quotes, under Turkish geopolitical influence.
Why would I mean, I think the U.S. would be a big fan of that. Why would Russia allow that to happen, though? It seems like Russia would resist that at every turn.
That's why Turkey and Russia are in conflict there. Like Turkey and Russia are in conflict of influence in the Middle East.
And Turkey
You should
wants
read
Syria what
Zion.
for the shipping routes into the Mediterranean or whatever? Is that
No, it just wants more. It has the perfect geographic setup to just naturally, get in there. It has the origins of the two biggest navigable rivers in the Middle East, which are basically the two only navigable rivers in the Middle East, the Tigris and the Euphrates. It dams them up. There are no mountain ranges. It's just flatlands. Turkey can from most just roll in there with really not much to oppose it at all.
this?
Um,
Go ahead.
yes, please continue.
I was gonna say this is like, in my opinion, this could be like one of the greatest ironies in the history of all of fucking meme politics. One thing that I worry about is fundamentally the United States just abandoning the Middle East because we are so powerful with our oil production today because of the access that we have to like the shale oil and everything, that if we were to just say, well, hey, actually, the Middle East, LOL, that was about oil, and we're going to leave. And if we cede that entire territory to actors like Russia or China, that could actually lead to more instability in that region.
Well, it might lead to some instability, but you have to think from it from the perspective of last month, right? A Russian general got killed in Syria inspecting an IED, and the Russians are starting to lose soldiers in Syria. And you can also take the perspective of, okay, Russia interfered against us wherever it could. Now it's bogged down in Syria, which might gradually start evolving into being Putin's Iraq war.
But it seems like those states would have a preference for Russia rather than, because aren't these states essentially locked? Aren't your Shia majorities in the Middle East, they're essentially locked into like permanent war with like the Gulf states?
Syria isn't majority Shia. Syria is a bit of a conundrum thing, right? You have this vast desert flatland in the east of the country, which is predominantly Sunni in population. And in the western parts, you have the Atlas Mountains, right? And mountains everywhere in the world are great cultural reserves. Whenever people go and seek refuge, from persecution, etc., they end up mostly in mountains.
Sure.
Switzerland is a great example. Its population is German Protestants who left German Catholic lands, French Protestants who left French Catholic lands, etc., who all gathered up in the mountains and formed their own confederacy. And you have the same in the Atlas Mountains, where you have Lebanon and northwest Syria. It's all these minority groups, the Alawites, the Druze, the...
Don't these guys, don't they generally see themselves as more aligned with like with Iran more so than like down in the Gulf states regardless though?
Yes. Some of them do, some of them don't. I know that the Assads, who are Alawites,
Yeah.
they see themselves as well, but it's more like this corridor on the coastline of Syria and this Atlas Mountain region. These minorities fear nothing more than just Sunni domination. So it's not as much loyalty to Iran as it is fear of Saudi Arabia.
Of course, yeah. And then Iran seems to be the major player, whether we're talking about Hezbollah or Hamas or the Yemeni civil war. Iran seems to be the major sticking point.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Iran is actually also active in Nigeria. A lot of people laugh when you mention that, but no, there's Shia uprisings in Nigeria, which the government brutally crushes, like in ways that are fucking horrible. But yeah, Iran is active everywhere, more so than people think.
Yeah, so I guess what I wonder is it ever possible that as the U.S. begins to exhaust its oil reserves in the United States, or I shouldn't say begins to exhaust, as we move towards in that direction, we become less reliant on the Middle East for oil, that if we start to abandon those regions more and more, like we kind of did Iraq, what would a unified, like, it seems to me that Iraq, Iran, and Syria seem to me like they would want to be unified powers. Like Iraq, I think, is already like...
No, that's
don't think
not
so?
going to happen.
Why not?
There have been so many attempts at unifying these and creating unified countries that all just fell apart. What we often forget is that before colonialism, the one thing that held all of this together was Islam, the caliphate. You had this common religious cultural understanding. And then, this is a state because God told us to way of doing things disappeared with the advent of nationalism, socialism, etc., etc. Ever since the Arabs have tried, Arabs, when we say Arabs, we think of like a people stretching from Syria to Yemen to Saudi Arabia. What we ignore when we say that word is there are so many differences between the Arabs. There's no such thing as just an Arab. There are cultural differences.
Sure.
And there are cultural differences, significant ones, between the Syrians of Syria and the Arabs of Syria and the Arabs of Iraq. Unifying, that's going to happen. But what I do believe will happen as we increasingly pull out, the Americans, I should say, is three main power players, namely the Iranians, the Turks, and the Saudis will compete over dominating that region. That's what I believe will happen.
I guess I figure that it feels like at the end of the day, how much influence do the is it the KRG that in Iraq, the Kurds in Iraq?
Oh,
how much influence do they have over Iraqi policy? Because I'd feel like they wouldn't be too fond of being aligned with Turkey at all.
No. That's where you're ironically wrong.
Yeah.
I actually talked to an American who went to fight ISIS with a Kurdish volunteer militia, and the biggest surprise to him when he went there was that the Kurds of Iraq hate and despise the Kurds of Syria, and interestingly, also the Kurds of Iraq hate and despise the Kurds of Turkey, and vice versa. Like, they really don't get along. There are many historical, cultural, and even political reasons. You have to keep in mind that the Kurds of Syria, their political organization is Marxist socialist, while the Kurds in Iraq, they're just happy that they have their republic now. They're semi-autonomous independent republic.
Do you think does Turkey recognize these distinctions?
Yes, it is. No. That's the point I'm getting to. Erdogan very happily and very openly made a business deal with the Kurds of Iraq. He's very fond of them. He sees them as a security buffer to keep out the insanity of Iraq, and he buys oil from them. And it's pretty much the only place the Kurds can sell their oil to because they don't have access to the ocean.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. I know that Turkey hates the PKK Kurdish people in
Syria.
Their country.
Well, they're not a problem anymore because the Turks occupied northern Syria.
Sure. Yeah. They moved it. Wait, does Turkey still occupy that area, or have they moved out yet?
Yes.
They just hold on to it.
That is the biggest challenge to the current status quo in the Middle East right now, because what the Iranians and the Saudis have been doing for the last 20 years is they set up, fund, and create enemy militias and tear societies apart from Syria to Iraq. That's what they do. They just finance rival militias, and then the places that they involve themselves in just brutally burn to the ground. And what the Turks are doing is really fascinating, but also really smart. They sit back, they watch the Saudis and the Iranians tear each other apart with their proxies, and then they move in and they offer investment, they offer jobs, they offer housing. That's what the Turks are doing right now in northern Syria. They're building housing blocks, they're building towns, they're settling Arab refugees there. They're basically creating a kind of a showcase society for Arabs in northern Syria, where they can basically show to other Arabs who live in Egypt, in Yemen, in Saudi, wherever you may want to. So, like, here, look at this. This is what life would be like in the Middle East, dominated by us. That's what the Turks are doing there.
Okay. The final question that I have is whether or not, this is something I've always wondered, if you think that there are problems that we have in the world that is just too difficult for democratically elected leaders to deal with. So as an example, if I were to talk about the difference between lynching black people versus like an undercurrent of systemic racism that might exist in the criminal justice system, it seems like lynching is bad. It's obviously bad. We should not allow it. But when it comes to addressing more complicated problems, it feels democratically like we are frozen in the United States. So right now, our Congress, for instance, can't do anything. We can't pass any major legislation because we're just gridlocked on everything. Do you think that that's a fundamental inherent tension in democracies, that they can't address more complicated, nuanced problems, or is there something else preventing these problems?
Not necessarily. That is a quirk of the American system, because the American system is intentionally set up in a way that very little gets done very slowly. It's a quirk of the American system. There's actually a lecture I attended at university about this topic by a historian who studied the history of Ukraine, specialized in the Chernobyl massacre. Chernobyl disaster.
Gotcha.
And he brought up the fact that there were several examples of generals in that case. Like, for example, the commander-in-chief of the Air Force in Ukraine ordered 200 or so helicopter pilots to go into certain death, basically throwing the sandbags on the reactor. And then you had an army general who ordered 200,000 Soviet soldiers basically into certain death, clearing out the reactor debris. And he brought this up in the context of this was only possible in an authoritarian regime like the Soviet Union. In a democracy, if you have a nuclear meltdown, a full-on meltdown like that, where it would be required to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people, he is not entirely sure if a democracy would be capable of making that decision. So, yeah, there certainly are challenges where it is questionable if a democracy would be capable of making such a decision. I would agree with you on that. But when it comes to the US system, change does happen. If you look at you had slavery legal. It took you a while longer than most other countries to abolish it, but eventually you got there,
Yeah,
And
I get my only issue is in looking at issues like that. Like, I feel like slavery is like an easy one where it's like, this is a big thing that needs to go away. But like smaller,
I think that a lot of Americans, in my opinion, that's more of a political thing, though. I believe a lot of Americans fixate far too much on federal power. Do you know how we got socialized healthcare in Germany?
Well, given what you just said, I'm going to guess that it started out on more local levels and eventually it was federally adopted once it worked.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Not even on a government level. What happened was it started. We got German school children are taught that we got socialized healthcare in 1870 through Bismarck, and that is not true. Bismarck, if you don't know, was a military dictator. That is not true. That's a nice little story about a benevolent dictator that the dictator invented. The reality is that it was factory workers in Berlin for the Krupp works that basically created an insurance pot where they decided, okay, we're going to rally together, and one of us puts 10% of our income into a common pot. And if any one of us gets ill, we'll pay for the healthcare needs. And it worked. And sooner or later, factory workers all across Prussia started adopting this system throughout the 1860s. And then Bismarck, the military dictator, decided to nationalize it and to take control over it, not out of benevolence, but because he disliked the idea of these people, these organized workers, challenging the authority of the state, which ultimately was his authority. You see, there was this like bottom to top thing, this small organized thing. And I do genuinely believe that when it comes to political reforms in the United States, the best starting point is always on a state level. Legalization of marijuana in Colorado, for example, and these kinds of things. Start small on a local level with small things that you can do yourself, and not just through petitioning your senator or congressman, because that is something that will, I believe, have the least results.
Yeah, you're at 100% correct. One of the things that was so powerful about the American system early on, I think, from my understanding, is that we had a big pride in the localization of our politics. And I think sometime after the 40s, especially during civil rights, we basically just threw all of that away to rely almost entirely on federalized systems to solve our problems. But unfortunately, we've seen the limits of that. So, for instance, in complaining about police brutality, we run into problems that federalized systems aren't actually designed to solve. Like, the federal system doesn't deal with local police, and people are frustrated when they look to like the president for an answer on their local policing that they can't get one that's satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a bit of a cultural disconnect. I think too many Americans were raised to believe that if you want to get something done, go to the president or something like that. That's not really how government a lot of times works.
Yeah. So somebody in chat asked, what would healthcare reform on a local/state level look like? I can think of two great examples. One is something called Romney Care, right? In the state that he was from, I'm pretty sure they enacted on a state level. And two, I think in California, I think we have something called, is it called CAL?
I think I can show you something that I'll share these articles with you. I actually wanted to use them in the video. There is currently right now a push for socialized healthcare in Alaska that interestingly nobody is noticing. And it's mainly pushed by like people who have dangerous jobs like fishermen who are sick and tired of being basically of not having healthcare available. There is a someone running for Congress, I believe, called Al Cross, an independent.
Okay.
I'll send you all the information that I have on this, and you can read this on your own leisure. But basically, yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now. I think Alaska is the most likely state to introduce socialized single-payer healthcare. and it might be a good model to copy later down the road. And it seems to be working because it's out of sight, out of mind. So the Central Republican Party doesn't involve itself and try to destroy it,
Sure.
etc., etc.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all that kind of I had for now. Yeah, it feels like it feels like it's impossible to put a timetable on it. I would be stupid if I could. I would guess 15 years. But it feels like at some point China is probably going to be like the head of like the new world order. And unfortunately, it feels like people are going to, it's going to like the realization is going to be rather sudden, but it's going to be far, 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 far too late to do anything about.
Well, I think we will get used to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, you might. Well, actually, no, because even as Germans, you guys see yourselves to some extent as the head of the European Union, which is the largest unified market of the world. I know Americans aren't going to. And even for the entire West, it's going to be weird looking to China rather than the United States for like direction on foreign policy.
It's not so much, I don't think it will be impact culturally.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just that we will have to get used to the fact that when we speak of Far East Asia, that we see it as like a Chinese sphere of influence. But also, there are things that could dramatically stand in the way. Like one of the biggest historical ironies has to be that Vietnam and the United States are right now building a sphere of alliance of military cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
Because with all the bad blood that there may be over the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese are far too realistic and pragmatic and realize that yeah, the big Chinese bully is the far bigger threat.
I don't know. I heard from Non-Compete on his YouTube video that Vietnam actually loves China.
Complete nonsense.
Yeah, no.
Complete nonsense. Like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. Mm-hmm. That's not gonna happen. The Vietnamese are very much aware of who the bigger threat is.
Okay. Yeah, well. Fuck. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. I'll probably watch your stuff. More, and if I have questions or whatever, I'll poke you, and I'm curious. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
All right. Well,
and I'll get back to work. Thank you. I'll see you later.
Yeah,
have a good one.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, so just to state, this is not a drama alert or anything like that. This is a respectful disagreement with another person's opinion on this.
Mm-hmm. On what thing?
Overall, I think I have some disagreements with the China policy discussion. In addition, I think something you offered 3 comments about can democracy efficiently solve these problems? Are dictatorships more efficient at solving these problems than democracies? And there was another question there, which I'm blanking on right now. I'd like to push back on some of those. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. What would you like to talk about first? Work backwards or go from start to beginning?
Wherever you want to start.
Okay. So, in my opinion, when it comes to talking about the whole democracy versus dictatorships thing, every form of government has constituents until or unless there is a country or government of people that are like linked via hive mind. There's always going to be constituents. The American president has to think about like the electoral college and stuff like that, while Xi Jinping needs to think about the various power structures that be around him. Some of those are the people. Like the reality is like, just because there's no democracy doesn't mean in theory there could be a mass popular protest that encourage.
Wait, I hard disagree with this. I agree, obviously, that there is some level of political pressure that every single like leader will face, but you can't tell me that Xi or Putin have the same level of fear of being ousted by their public as an American president. Like, well, yes, if push comes to shove and these populations are literally starving to death or being like murdered, then yeah, sure they will. But like, it's not the same.
So here's what I'm suggesting. In America, if Trump does something really bad, as long as it's not criminal, or for that here, let's make it so if a president does something like fucks up badly, like the response to a hurricane disaster goes really poorly, we don't have a recall system. And even then, it's a peaceful transfer of power through an election. The problem with dictatorships is, yes, they can respond quote unquote faster to the issues, but on the other hand, there's much more risk at play. If they fuck up badly, they don't wake up the next morning. And while China and Russia have been a little bit more secure at this recently, other countries that have had these quote unquote efficient dictatorships have not.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, sure. I don't know if we disagree. So I guess my to distill this down in its simplest form, do you think that Xi has to worry about public opinion or Putin has to worry about public opinion as much as an American president does? the answer can't be yes to this, right? I agree
well,
that there's
I
always
mean,
going to be some level
well, no,
of public
okay,
pressure,
okay.
but of course it's not the same, right?
I mean, like, look, much to your disagreement, I think, unfortunately, specifically when it comes to the conversation of the conservative party of the United States of America, there's so much anti-democratic forces at play that I wouldn't say they have to worry about it significantly
No, hold
more.
on. This is so wrong. We can pretend that the Republican Party is anti-democratic, but the reality is at least some 48% of like the divide between Democrats. The Republican Party enjoys a strong support from its base in the U.S. The Republican Party does not rule from a 15% minority. It's not like the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. The Republican Party has a strong, not plurality, but group of people in the United States that supports them. Some 45% of voters. It's not.
Sure, but there's a difference between 30% and like 65%.
Yeah, but nobody. The Democrats don't have 65%, right? Like,
what if we're talking like Obama and his popular support at the height of his popularity, he polled at like 60%.
Okay,
Trump
but
at the height of his popularity has been at like 40 on a good day.
And Bush at the height of his popularity was like 85, right? Like I don't think that these are the best ways to judge. Like you know, I don't know. I don't think I agree with this.
I
agree with you that
there's
yeah, go ahead.
Go on. No, go on.
I agree with you that there's going to be some level of public support or pushback that every leader is going to have to deal with, of course. But I don't think it's the same as like a Soleimani is always going to have more authority on his projects than like the head of our like CIA or something, or like Xi or Putin are always going to have like more ability to control and manipulate their people.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Wait a minute. Iran actually has a democracy that, for the most part, has like passed most general understandings of like what a fair democracy is from the outside, or at least the last time I checked into that. So like.
My understanding of the IRG, the Iranian Royal Guard, is that this is literally a body that answers literally only to the president, that literally has independent sources of funding that can never be challenged by their congressional body. Also, I don't think Iran is a democracy. Isn't that like a royal bullshit or whatever?
Well, no, it's like a theocratic monarchy, like parliamentary systems. Like instead of a king, they have the religious hierarchy, but there is a parliamentary body that's supposed to check it. And depending on who you talk to and depending on what's going on at the moment, they actually have more power. It gets into the complicated relationships of more of what's going on in the world and stuff like that. Iran is not a total dictatorship, say comparably to Russia or China. I think something to make a point across though is that like China and Russia are like the heights of like what this kind of dictatorship would mean. When most other dictatorships we're talking about the average quality dictatorship or like absolute power, authority, oligarchy, or whatever, we're looking to the various places like the Middle East, like East, or that matter in South America or Africa. And like when it comes into these comparison points, that's interesting. Further, the other issue with these kind of big dictator oligarchical stuff, they're usually not great when it comes to transfers of power, whether we're talking about in China, how it went from Xi Jinping to the current governmental forms, or for that matter, what happened with Russia or with other governments. Like, what is Russia going to look like after Putin's gone?
I mean, I imagine it's probably going to be like some Putin puppet or the next guy in line. No, I mean, like for instance, how many people? There? So I don't know the answer to this. I don't have the historical background, but like for instance, I do know of one example. A lot of people thought that in Cuba, after Saddam Hussein died, well, once he's gone, then for sure this place is going to be way different. And his brother took over.
You mean Castro?
Or yeah, I'm sorry, not Saddam Hussein, Castro. That once Castro, but I'm pretty sure his brother Raul.
Yeah, Raul took over.
Yeah, as soon as Raul took over, like it's business as usual. It's the same as before.
Well, sure, but like it's the same thing with like monarchs and stuff like that. Like sometimes like there's a peaceful transfer of power, and sometimes there isn't. There's a full-on civil war, and like we've seen that. We saw that in Egypt with came to the transfer of power between the various governments into the military and stuff like that. We've seen that we're probably about to start seeing that with what's going on in Saudi Arabia, with how the prince has been like fighting for power in preparation for his dad dying and stuff like that. Like fundamentally, like the perk of democracy is you don't, at least when it comes to like modern, fairly robust industrial democracies, there's like no massive violent civil wars. Despite all the memeing about it, despite all the threats and people like nerve-wracking about it, there isn't going to be a violent civil war. Unfortunately, there might be some acts of terrorism, but it's not going to be full-on violent civil war in the United States of America. And for that matter, there's not going to be a full-on civil war in Western Europe, or for that matter, East Asian democratic countries.
Well, what about in terms of like China over the past since World War II? Have there been like major uprisings in China that have looked like?
Yeah, the communists and the nationalists fought a massive drawn-out civil war after World War II.
How long has China been relatively stable and not embittered in war?
I mean, you could it gets into a controversial debate and opinion about how peaceful China was under Mao in the late last like what the documentary referred to as the Red Princes. But like since Deng Xiaoping, China has been relatively peaceful, but that's only been at most a 40-year period if you're being generous.
Okay, so like how much further behind is China from like Europe in general? Because I know that like even post World War II, a lot of these European countries were fighting the fuck out of each other as well. Like I think it wasn't just the 90s when Ireland stopped bombing each other and killing each other.
Yeah, that's like 20 people. That's not an industrial warfare or combat. Like the Maoists, the Maoists and the nationalists were like throwing tanks and planes and bombs at each other. The IRA is effectively like a really robust and powerful gang. Like there's different things of power we're talking about here. Like if you're gonna say like now if you're gonna say something like the Balkan conflict, sure, but the reality is like the Balkans were, to be completely blunt, a shit show, a complicated mess of those of really tightly knit ethnicities where you're gonna fight out a civil war or they're gonna have outside powers maintain peace in the region.
So do you legitimately believe that China is just going to fall randomly to civil conflict over the next 20 years?
So like take it like this: if the people in China, if they cannot continue to maintain the economic prosperity that they've promised, what does the average person in China get for all this authoritarianism, all this inequality, all this poverty, things like that? If there's no promise of economic advancement, what do you get from all of this? What, some strange combination of Confucianist nationalism with communism? Like, there's nothing. Like, it's fundamentally it's like again, like I think when people talk about dictatorship, I think an important comparison is like kings and monarchs. In fact, yeah, you've got the Habsburgs, and like Carlos V is great, but like 2 generations down, his kids like not all there mentally. He's got like a large jaw. You're just rolling the dice effectively for X number of things to go right or wrong. The perk of democracy is I am 99.9% sure that Trump will not send the tanks down DC Boulevard and start a dictatorship.
Are you not? Would you say 99.99 right now?
No, 100%. 100%. Trump
okay.
has no. Trump will not do that. Maybe.
Wait, so weren't you just on here a few days ago talking about how Trump might not certify the election results and shit? You don't think that?
I'm not. Yeah, but that doesn't mean he would take power. I'm saying that he might fundamentally, he might put up a fight stiff about it. But in the same way, like we're totally okay with like large portions of Americans being disenfranchised from voting due to a combination of things. Like we don't live in a very democratic democracy, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be a peaceful transfer of power. Like, could there be like a conservative between the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and the various right-wing militias? Could there be some like violent shit? Sure. Could there be the American trouble? Sure. What is that going to be? It's going to be about 100 radicals all around the country blowing stuff up randomly. If you remember the 80s and 90s, unfortunately, that's not exactly uncommon in American history. So, fundamentally, like, that's not like look, Ireland in the United Kingdom did fight like a drag-out war, but that was not the IRA bombings of the 80s and 90s. Like, there's a big difference in that.
Okay.
So.
Well, I guess we'll check on Chinese stability. I know that it's always been a common talking point, especially because the Chinese growth slumped in ways that were worrying economists around the world. I know that the oil slump trailed that quite a bit as well. I guess we'll see what happens, I guess, if they...
So here's the discussion about what China and America. The thing people don't want to talk about is like the Chinese economy is built on like exports, which is kind of like, if you recall, what the American economy was built upon a generation ago. And that only works as long as countries aren't interested in investing into their export-import capacity. So once enough Americans are saying, hey, I kind of want a job again that isn't in service, we could debate if that's right or wrong or economically efficient. If that's what happens occasionally, America's going to start building out its own interest and invest in self-maintainability the same way America built up its own
yeah, but this is assuming that America is able to do it and bear the cost of that as well. Everybody says that they want iPhones made in the United States. Nobody wants to pay $3,000 for an iPhone.
Why do you think we make iPhones in China?
Because it's cheap as fuck.
Why are they so cheap though?
Because China has cheaper labor on one, and then because they've got the capital base to do it.
Well, wait a minute. So capital base though, where's most of that capital base come from?
Well, right now from China. I mean, like they run it all themselves.
No.
It's not from foreign investment.
a lot of that comes from government investments.
Sure. But it's
not
ran
hard for
profitably.
government-
It's not all just massively subsidized to like a Chinese loss. Like,
No, a lot of it is government investments, and we aren't 100% sure how profitable these things are. We've never done outside, or no, China's never allowed like an outside audit to analyze how efficient these things are. Further, it's returns the efficiency. So like, I'm glad we didn't get into like, well, the Chinese are better at manufacturing. Like, no one in China is born with like a +2 mechanical engineering perspective or something like that. The reason the Chinese have a robust engineering system is because of those government investments in education, those government investments in industrial agriculture, like industrial agriculture and industrial like manufacturing. It's completely government sponsorship and stuff like that. Was there was there an element of really cheap labor early on? Yes, but right now, if we're looking at like widgets being produced in both countries, America and China have similar levels of productivity. It's just that China has is currently doing all the production. But if we're looking at the individual competitiveness, they have a similar level of competitive productivity. Now, if we're really going to talk about this, if you're trying to manufacture iPhones in America, the one thing you have a benefit in America that you don't have in China is you don't have to ship them back and forth. So further, like,
but even if we
iPhones in China, in America, you could do it.
Yeah, we could, but even if we did do it, it's not because the average American decides they want their job back, right? Like these are still all going to be like white collar jobs and shit anyway. I don't know if there's ever going to be like this huge drive to like relocate.
What do you think what do you think is the manufacturing process of an iPhone in China? It's not sweatshops of children. It's a white collar job effectively. It's people like being paid relatively well compared to the average person in China.
I mean, I think that even if that's true, that's a recent development. Like I know that as of recently, like China has been more like on board with using like machines and shit, but like I'm pretty sure a lot of it is still literal like sweatshop labor. I don't think that all of China's economy is modernized and everybody there is like on average is a blue collar worker.
And that's if we're talking about trying to be like robust good social democrats. There is an argument. There was a strong Republican movement in the 90s to basically downgrade American laborers to take and work in Chinese-style factories, like decrease the way you stay competitive is you decrease the quality of labor. You decrease the quality of wages and life for average Americans. Like you could do that. Like if your goal was to create an economy competitive with China, there's a few levers you can push, and one of them is that one. If your goal is to remove manufacturing from China to make America the new export of the world, all you have to do is basically say, you know what? Sure, you can put suicide nets around American factories and do all this shit.
But American labor demand won't allow that to happen, right? We're not going to settle for that standard of living in the U.S.
Why do you think Chinese labor demand doesn't demand that? It's because the Chinese government cracks down on any labor movement.
Well, also, a little bit, but also probably because America industrialized and globalized and developed before China did as well, right? So we're past that phase of our early development. Like it's not like we never had that in our history. Like we absolutely had people working in mines and shit, like in early American history. We're past that now. But China's still developing past that.
Wait, there's a point that we like China doesn't have people working in mines to build iPhones. Like that's being done in Africa and South America. Like the second issue is fundamentally like if you examine the geography of where these rare earth materials are from, they're not being discovered in like at least to my understanding of the manufacturing process. I'm not like a random internet person. That's where I'm going to cry and shit if I'm proven wrong. I'm wrong, but like most of these rare earth materials come from Africa and South America. Those places, America have relationships with those countries also. Like it's not like China uniquely, like unlike say England back in like the 1800s, where uniquely the United Kingdom had a lot of access to very, very shallow coal fields. Purely energy wise, America has a competitive advantage because we have more access to raw materials like petrochemicals and oils. China really doesn't have that kind of access. They've got a lot of coal, but as we know, even basic oil is better than coal. Like natural gas is better than coal, just when it comes to simplicity of efficiency.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess all we can say is we'll see. I think one of the things that was brought up in the video that I do recall hearing a million times is I feel like I've heard throughout the 90s even that American economic explosion means that their middle class is going to start to demand to be treated better, that they're going to run into all these problems with the stability of their lower class labor and blah, 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 blah. And it seems like that hasn't happened yet. It feels like China, like every time there's an economic slump, people are like, well, China recover, the China demand is decreasing and blah, 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 blah. And it seems like China's weathered all of these storms like pretty successfully so far.
Well, the secret to an economy is a population plus investment. China has population, they have investment right now. The big question is essentially there's two big questions when it comes to the Chinese economy. One, will there are they doing modern monetary theory? Are the books completely cooked, or is it all real? Because on one hand, they could be the proof that modern monetary theory, or something around the theory of hyperliquid capital, is actually accurate. If that's true, that's a very interesting proposition about what that can mean for global economies. Like, if America could spend the way China does, we certainly could create a lot of jobs. We could create a lot of stuff. It would be very interesting how that influences American manufacturing and productivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, the other big question about China is look, what's the most violent this country has gone in the past 40 years?
I don't know. What would be the most violent? I'm not sure.
So, by domestic terrorism, that would be probably the Oklahoma City bombing.
Okay.
Right? That's in terms of raw death count, China has unfortunately had to do the Tiananmen Square massacre, and that wasn't a domestic terrorist attack. That was done by the state against protesters.
How many people died in that?
It's debated, unfortunately, but more robust numbers can be pretty high. I don't have it off the top of my head, but let me give it the old Google. So the BBC has an article from 2017 claiming 10,000.
Okay. Just curious.
And look, if the only reason American investors have been so curious, for the global investors have been so curious about China, is because it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there. And a lot of that opportunity is because of American capital, and because of Chinese state capital investments, and because of the need for the decline to invest in American capital in other places. The reason, the core of the American economy is consumption, and consumption's going down because so few people have any capital to consume. If you actually can start to grow an American middle class again, there's an argument that America could be a lot wealthier than it is right now, and actually could create the consumer state that compete with China. I know. And the reality is, when it comes to a foreign country, foreign government, or not for, when it comes to a company, you don't like to gamble. You do saved investments. That's the same thing happened to Russia two decades ago. Everyone thought Russia was going to be a massive opportunity. Within the decade, the Russian government was seizing everything that was invested, and that was it. I
don't feel like Russia is comparable to China.
I disagree. I think essentially there are four-ish government bodies which have a very similar history and politics. There's the Greater EU. There's the former Soviet Union. There's modern China, the United States. It seems like United States and China are right now the two good comparisons of each other.
I feel like Russia spent its entire life trying to establish enough economic and military might such that it could control the world, but it was constantly at ends with U.S. foreign influence throughout the Cold War, and it never ever had the economic relationships that China did with the rest of the world. Imagine for the Soviet Union to be comparable to China today, the Soviet Union have to be 100 times more prevalent in terms of trading, and it would have to be aligned with the United States economically. Both of these things are totally not true, right?
Earlier in the Cold War, the Soviet Union almost had that. In that brief moment before the Cold War, but the Soviet Union was on that. In that brief moment before before the Korean War, the Soviet Union was getting there. Remember, Lend-Lease, the entire anti-Nazi trade pact. We think of it as a war front, but the part of it we need to understand is that trade pact was distributing raw materials, resources, guns, ammos, and troops and intelligence around the world for all nations. It wasn't just America sending boats full of guns and food to Europe. It was the Soviet Union sending raw materials to the United Kingdom and the allies in China.
Wait, I thought the Soviet Union was the primary benefiter of the Lend-Lease program.
Well, no, they're the primary benefiter, but they still export stuff to help support other economies. At least my understanding, reading of the data I've seen.
Sure, I guess they might have a bit, but they needed Lend-Lease to survive, or Germany would have destroyed them.
No, they did. But understand, we just talked about America is also kind of like Soviet Union back in that. Soviet Union was a net importer of all these goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are the net importer of all these goods and services. The thing we need to understand is these things can change.
Sure. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, the big advantage I think is important to understand, And a lot of people, specifically a lot of like leftists and conservatives from Europe, don't respect this. I think as long as we're not talking about like the far like ethno-nationalist right of America, most people seem to agree that like equality, pluralism, racism, bad in America. There's some conservatives that will pretend, but most people seem to agree like America should not equal whiteness. There should be equality of religion, race, etc. We believe these things, right?
I hope so. I think generally we're a liberal country, yeah.
Yeah. Well, understandably, like if you look at like the other things that quote unquote like rival the United States of America, the EU trading bloc, China, Japan, they're all like incredibly racist. Like there is no immigrant from like Africa or South America that's gonna become a billionaire in China. And that
might be true, but China might fancy itself racist within its own borders, but it doesn't prevent it from reaching outwards to other countries to work with them.
But like that's important though. That's like it's to able to use some form of meritocracy, regardless of how corrupt it is, even if it works for 1% of the population, as a motivation to become more productive, to create and generate more stuff for more people. That's incredibly useful. Like, and this isn't just China having this issue. Like, the EU is right now struggling with like the whole it's about to go through like Japan's problems. Like they've got a lot of old people, not enough young people. Their welfare state's being stretched to the maximum, and they can only automate so much of the workforce. They had an opportunity to try to bring in to like recognize, hey, all these refugees from our parents' like colonial wars of colonial aggression in the Middle East and Africa are coming here. They want to come and work here and get equality and be secular and have clearance like that and open up food restaurants and work on our labor markets. But the EU panicked, and now there's racism. Like the primary economy of Turkey, Greece, and Spain seems like might be coming future will be to keep refugees out. And this is going to set the stage for the EU basically following down the path of Japan, which is a slow stagflation economy. You need to have young people to work the jobs. You can't just turn everything into robots. America, we don't have this problem. Take it like this. I know it was in 2018. I think there might have been a few elections that changed it, but most of the big left-wing parties in Europe, they're not especially pro-immigrant. Not all of them, but not all their members, but a lot of them, they're not exactly like most.
Yeah, of course, because they've got a more populist outlook on the economy. They want to be protectionist. They don't want to let immigrants come in and steal work from there.
But well, even Bernie Sanders is pro-immigrant.
Even Bernie Sanders talked about
in 2020. We're talking 2020. We're not talking like the 1990s.
No, even in 2016, Bernie Sanders was pretty anti. I mean, it was he had definitely had a more bend on his economic policy to be more protectionist. Yeah.
We're not talking protectionist. Protectionism is a whole other thing. We're talking about just immigration.
No, immigration is pretty closely tied to protectionism. Protectionism is the idea that you're protecting the natives and your native economy.
No. Protectionism is like tariffs and shit, right?
I think protectionism can be immigration policy as well. I think that a protectionist generally disfavors immigration in favor of.
I worked on the Bernie 2015 campaign. Was Bernie definitely more moderate to conservative on immigration in the 1990s, even the early 2000s? Most definitely. However, like the Bernie 2016 campaign, very similar immigration policy to Clinton. In 2020, the Bernie, which I was a campaign I was not part of, so I can say this with a lot more like neutrality. The Bernie campaign had a similar, if not more liberal, immigration policy. Remember, Bernie was one of the few people that said immigrants, whether they are undocumented or otherwise, deserve to have access to Medicare. Not everyone on that Democratic stage was willing to agree to that. Now we can debate if giving immigrants or undocumented immigrants access to Medicare is good or bad from like an electoral perspective. It's good. We can definitely say that was definitely pro-immigrant. Comparatively to where there are European like labor parties, left-wing parties, whatever you want to call them, who are saying we need to decrease the number of immigrants, or we need to say only immigrants with college degrees can come in, or only immigrant women can come in. America is entering a world where we might be potentially, assuming we can avoid the ethno-nationalist right, the only country that is proud to say we want immigrants. And that's how you counterbalance the decreasing birth rates. You cannot be a country of old people and still have a major global economy.
Okay.
Do you disagree?
We'll see. Go. What's the next point you want to talk about?
I think so. We did China. We did talk about democracy, democracy. There was something I'm blanking on it now because unfortunately I got to that point. I should have written them down. So I do think, part of what Kraut and you have implied, it seems like there's going to be some sort of conflict between America and China. What do you think this conflict's going to be violent?
No, I think it'll just be China slowly encroaching on the relationships that we built around the world, and then the U.S. losing more and more authority over those relationships.
Okay, but like, are these going to be violent?
We're not going to go to war over it. No, I don't think so.
Okay, so now I'm not placing a moral judgment on here. I'm just asking, trying to offer from like a cynical perspective.
Wait, hold on, real quick. You're lagging a lot. Can you reconnect?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Should I just like disconnect from the call and connect again?
Yeah, maybe. Or in the bottom left, does it say? Is it like red or something? Does it show like a weird?
Yeah, my internet's definitely touch and go. By the looks of it.
Okay, it's okay. Okay, go for it. Try it again. Are you
testing?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you offered that like China is going to get more involved in like the various American trade partners around the world. Like one example we saw was like China buying ports in like the EU, for example.
Sure.
Correct? Okay, you said, is this a bad thing in your opinion? I'm not placing moral judgment. I'm trying to examine this question here.
From U.S. perspective, yes, I would say so.
Why is it bad?
Because it means we're going to be less in charge of writing, I guess, like how the world ought to function.
I mean, is this going to, like, what's the negative result from that? Is like China going to make it to where Hollywood movies must include Chinese actors?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, I mean, we already see that happening today. Yeah. For instance, maybe criticism of the Chinese regime becomes impossible because of China's economic influence over the other countries, which is already happening to some extent.
Okay. Hey, but if in exchange of like going through Chinese censorship, American movies get distributed in China, and Chinese people the people of the People's Republic of China consume American media, is that good?
I mean, not if all of it has to be filtered and censored for the Chinese people to remove any offensive imagery from it.
I mean, if Captain America is still there, is it there despite all the offensive imagery being removed? Is it still? I think that's still pretty good. If the options are censorship and no access to Chinese markets when it comes to like American media, I think that's worthwhile. Like, I think one of the most uniquely powerful things about American culture, regardless of how trash or not trash your opinion is on the subject matter, I think the fact that our culture, quote unquote, like the Hollywood movie system, is valuable. It is good. For all the mediocre plot stuff, there are some good stories in terms of good ideals that are uniquely American inside the Avengers storylines that were distributed in China. And I say this as someone's pointing out, like, I understand how sexist, homophobic, racist, some of the censorship that happens in China. I fully recognize that. Like, I know people have been to China. I understand the level of censorship that's going on. I'm not discounting that. I'm not like again, I am not a Maoist or leftist. I think those people are dumb and boring. However, like, if the options are like conflict or trade with some lack of benefits, I think that's good. Because from what I've seen and read, it seems that our movies are more popular than theirs, both in their markets and in our markets and in global markets.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it feels like China has more, like the fact that China can control even how media appears in the U.S. Seems a little surprising to me. Like, even in the U.S. What?
No, go on.
So, like, for instance, like, we make movies that are distributed in the U.S. that have, like, pro-China, pro-CCP, like, members, like, avowedly speaking about it. We have an inability for, people that belong to U.S. companies like the NBA or whatever to criticize China. Like, it feels like that influence is moving far more in the other direction than us having this influence on China. It's just what it feels.
So how do you propose we stop this?
Well, right now we don't have the ability to, because we can't apply any pressure to China. Right now, if you want access to Chinese markets, you kind of have to play by the Chinese rules. And we don't really have like multiple countries that we can band together with to say like, well, no, we're not going to do this. Like, you either need to change or you're going to lose access to our markets.
I mean, so let's say we get every country in the world that watches American movies to say, hey, China, you need to show your people the Avengers movies with no censorship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not it's just going to be like, now you can argue that it being pirated will be good. Essentially, you're forcing the market to pirate and just get around that. However, I would argue that like that's not like American media, if it isn't going to end the Chinese economy. It's not going to end the Chinese state.
No, maybe not. No, I mean, but this is just like one part. I mean, it's obviously important enough to them that they can demand concessions for it, and they've gotten that. So I mean, like,
well, yes, but like the reason why is because it makes billions of dollars to the Hollywood film industry and stuff like that. It creates a lot of jobs in America.
Sure.
So, a way we can do this is say, hey, Disney Studios, stop doing that, and they'll say no. Well, but if we use market influence and say, hey, I imagine you would say, hey, we'll put tariffs on Disney movies. I imagine that wouldn't be a good thing. However, we could say, hey, China, I mean, hey, Disney, we'll give you $1 billion in tax credits, or just $1 billion cash to make movies in America with no censorship. If you agree to not censor the movies when putting them abroad, would that be good?
I mean, I don't know if the American government can subsidize it to the level that you're compensating them for the lost access to the Chinese markets. These markets are massive.
I mean, I imagine part of this essentially is a recognition of if you want to have like a more direct conflict with China, you need to do like essentially some element of like state involvement in the marketplace.
But it's better rather than like tanking your own economy and hoping that we can just blow the fuck up out of the budget to make massive contributions to Hollywood. I think it would be better if you could use multiple countries to exert soft economic power over China. We can't do that unilaterally, but we could do it multilaterally. Okay. So for instance, do something like the TPP.
Okay, so we tried the TPP. So the thing we do is so the way the TPP works, essentially we say, hey, Vietnam, we'll import more stuff in Vietnam. We won't give any tax punishments for American manufacturing once they move to Vietnam if you work with us in challenging China. That's essentially what you're suggesting, and we do that to every country in the world that's not China, basically, correct?
Sure, yeah. Okay.
Naturally, if we are removing penalties for American companies to move manufacturing to Vietnam, naturally what's going to happen is there's going to be certain economic factors that are going to affect Americans.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like, it wasn't all NAFTA didn't purely steal American jobs. That's kind of false. It wasn't purely NAFTA, but it wasn't purely in manufacturing. There were a lot of employment in manufacturing that moved into other countries because of things like NAFTA, because of the things like TPP, and like that. Fundamentally, in the same way, there was a general revolt against things like the EU and Europe because it felt like it wasn't democratic enough, because people felt like the EU was far and not very attached to representative people's opinions, even though they might support the concept of being part of the United European network or market. They want to be involved. I think a similar thing happens. Like when people feel isolated and separated from the democratic process, or for that matter, the political process, they get angry and revolt. If you want to do a global trade agreement, you need to give people buy-in. So you can do that by trying to explain, hey, if you do mass education, say, like, hey, if we make iPhones cheaper in Vietnam, that means there's going to be more jobs available for people who want to get cheaper phones, things like that. However, what needs to be understood, though, is like you need to give people buy-in. You can't just say that. Now, that's a uniquely American problem, because we uniquely, this is what's come back around to one of our original disagreements, we uniquely empower the poorest, least urban Americans because through our electoral process. If you want TPP, we need to actually give more electoral power to the Americans that most benefit from the TPP, who are Americans that live in urban centers.
Okay. I don't know how this gets us into beating China in global trade, but
well, so if your goal is to beat China in global trade, then that means you form then you've got a couple of options, but one of the simple ones is you form a big trade bloc. You basically sit down with every country in the world and say, whatever China offers to give you, we'll give you double or whatever.
Wait,
and plus,
yeah, of course.
You don't worry about us invading you.
Wait, yeah, this is what I was talking about before, though, right? Multilateral trade agreements, right? Trading blocs.
Okay, but those resources that we give to countries to be competitive with China have to come from somewhere. Where? Correct?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the fact that I'm trying to demonstrate is like China, when they challenged America, they didn't do it by forming a big multilateral trade agreement with a bunch of countries around the world to challenge America's trade monopoly. They just took all the government capital possible, plus and then some, and invested it into Chinese education, Chinese manufacturing.
Sure, China
That
also
was
has
where
an amazing resource advantage over the United States as well, in the form of a
What
population. They've got a
resources?
ton people, human capital. They have
American productivity and Chinese productivity are relatively similar.
yeah, that's bad for us if you're talking about like a per person productivity because they have way more people than us.
Not per person on national level.
Okay.
Per industry, if we're talking about
Why doesn't America
the-
export the
the-
world's goods then? Why do they all come from China?
because the reality is it was essentially it was a couple of things. The primary reason, if we're talking about China specifically, is there was a point where we saw the tech economy taking off. We did so by essentially we realized in order for the tech economy to take off, we need to make cell phones and all computer parts as cheap as possible. And at that moment, the way to do so was to threaten and try to negotiate down the American labor force. When the American labor force rejected, you have to go to the threat, you have to follow through the threat and move the factories and investments out of China. Now, that's how, partially riding off the coattails of essentially what Samsung and a couple other East Asian companies already set down when the East Asian tigers started moving manufacturing in China in the post-80s opening up for China.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it was just simply our goal was just to make just phones, computer parts as cheap as possible.
What do you think is more
However,
likely right now? That China is in a better position to catch up to us in terms of productivity, or that we're going to catch up to China in terms of manufacturing? What do you think is more likely to happen?
I think it's purely a decision of what you want to invest your resources into. I think either way would work.
Because it feels to me like China is far more better positioned to just explode in terms of productivity than the U.S. is in terms of like, oh, well, we're going to just move all these supply chains back across the Pacific back over to the U.S. and now here we are. Like that seems.
We're already moving it. Most countries are already starting. Most companies are starting to move their supply chains out of China and into South Asia. It's totally possible to take those same kind of investments and invest it into America. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I'm saying it's just purely an examination of what the resources take. If America can either invest $1 billion into supporting every country in the world to challenge China, or spend $1 billion supporting America and that. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't think one is good or bad. I think there's a strong argument that the national TPP angle is better because it does more good for more people and creates a more peaceful situation through trade. However, you need to figure out you need to essentially recognize that either if we're working with a fixed set of capital, which it seems like from all the analysis we've done, China did not work with a fixed set of capital. That essentially they invented modern monetary theory essentially, before everyone else realized it was a thing. And you'll have to either buy off or invest, or to be blunt, fight off the people who are going to revolt in America against this kind of trade policy.
Okay. All right. What's your next point?
Do you disagree, or?
It feels to me like in order for me to buy into these arguments, I have to assume that the Western world is going to take these amazing steps in terms of like, oh yeah, we're going to bring back our supply chains, blah, 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 blah. We're going to do all that. And then China is going to sit with some of us and be like, oh, I don't know why our country is failing. We can't modernize any of our economy. Oh no, like it feels unrealistic to me. China has made massive gains in terms of economy and in terms of world position all across the world over the past 20 years. And you're telling me that at some vague point in the future, there's going to be a revolution or people are going to get unhappy and the West is going to totally reverse course and start bringing back manufacturing and bringing back like that just seems impossible for me to believe. It's possible, I guess, but I don't see like a causal igniter for that happening. Like everything else seems to be tending towards the opposite right now.
Look, I mean, there's certain forces at work. China seems to be trying to move more of its manufacturing out, at least not move or like relocate or invest in manufacturing outside China in Africa.
Sure, they're working on that, but only as their service industry and only as their mechanical labor explodes. Like, it's not like they're doing that and, oh, this is our chance to catch up. That's like, no, they're moving past that point like we did, and now they're even more modernizing their economy. That's not a benefit to us. That's not like, and like, imagine what you're saying there, right? China is turning other countries into their China. You want us to become that? Like, do you want, like, what you're essentially saying that we should do is we should become China's China. Like, okay, look, China's moving all of their manufacturing to Vietnam. That could be us. What if we became China's manufacturer? Like, what the fuck? Wait, how is that better for us?
So here's the secret I'm trying to argue, though. Mm-hmm. You don't need the conflict with China. Like, China doesn't exist without America.
I totally disagree with that. I don't think that's true. China doesn't exist without America?
when it comes to, okay, you need America to consume all the stuff you make. You can't just make stuff and sell it to
The
no one
rest
wants
of
to
the
buy it.
world consumes stuff.
We consume 30% of their stuff.
Sure, we consume a lot.
30%.
I think that China has. I think that China has the resources and the income to survive the collapse and destruction of the United States. Who's going to take our place? Like Germany's not going to step up and be like, okay, China, fall in line. Like,
you can't let China. You can't let the United States collapse.
But
that's why the consumer holds the cards when it comes to these kind of resource distribution. That's why China's doing the mercantilism stuff. They need to create consumers to balance out America.
I don't know. I mean, I could see like Africa and even South America becoming a replacement for those import markets eventually. It would hurt China, but I don't think China needs the United States to survive. I don't think that's 100% like.
Look, fundamentally, you need someone to consume all this stuff. If you're stuff, and it has to be America at the moment. Now, maybe that changes, but fundamentally, I think there's just too much investment into America to do that kind of thing. The same way, like I think the big issue with Kraut's thesis is it's very much proposing this kind of intense conflict that needs to occur with China. And I'm arguing the only way this conflict occurs is essentially America and China essentially equalize out their consumption and their exports. Essentially, they become like equal. Like each one consumes and exports a similar amount to each other, or to within them each other, and then they both take their sphere of influence in the world. If you want like a full conflict with China, naturally what's going to happen is you're going to become the exporter and China's going to become the consumer. And there's two ways you become the exporter. Either you downgrade the quality of American labor, and you basically make the Foxconn factories in America, like real Foxconn factories, like you bring the infernal mills to America, or you essentially push the efficiency of American manufacturing that's already here. And I think that might be possible based on the rate of manufacturing that is on the table in America, based on the industrialization, the automation that is possible. It seems like there's a good chance for that. That like there's a reason why all the big tech companies are coming out of here. Apple and Microsoft and all these companies have come out of the United States of America. They haven't come out of the EU. They haven't come out of random little countries around it. Like still, like the primary users of Alibaba, the primary users of Huawei, the primary users of there's the other big tech company in China I'm blanking on. Those companies are all based in China, and they mostly serve a Chinese consumption base. That's where I see there's the potential for the American export market to challenge China, but the end result will be China becoming a big 30% consumer of the American export industry. Now, there's a weird third path that gets into even weirder shit, like maybe China tries to become self-reliant because of either communist ambition or actual Red Scare, like they're going to try to conquer parts of East Asia stuff, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Isn't China already like perpetually in conflict over some of those Southeast Asian islands out there? Aren't they already like?
You know how we have right-wing crazies who are like talking about like, oh, we need to re-annex Panama in America.
Sure.
They have those people in China too. Like,
wait, so you don't think there's like a major push in China for control over some of those islands?
China doesn't have a deep water navy. China,
I feel like they're literally. I feel like that's been a big part of like Chinese imperialist stuff over the past like decade, is them fighting over.
If their interest was this kind of like violent, well, okay, the last decade, if that goal was so militant, why are they doing this whole rigmarole dance of like of debtor diplomacy, mercantilism stuff in Africa? Why not just do what America and the Europeans and the Soviet Union did, which was just support one militia versus another?
Because you can only do that if instability exists at a level enough such that there's a power you can support. We don't go in and cause instability in an otherwise stable nation. We usually would just prop up one side or pick a winner in a conflict and then hope that the person that emerges victorious is somebody that's loyal to us. It's not like China can go into like a well-functioning, stable country and just like overthrow the government. That kind of shit can't happen anymore.
Well, I'm not suggesting they're doing this in like Italy. I'm suggesting like there's the reality is like China has recognized that you don't need to do military stuff anymore. You can just purely do it through
economic power. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So like that's my argument for the whole like why the like South China Sea stuff is a lot of like ring and roll and dance.
Well, everything is going to be ring and roll and dance. Nobody wants to like. Nobody's going to blow shit up anymore. That's just not how we do things anywhere, right?
Well, so So thus the South China Sea is not that big of an issue. It's more of a fishing rights problem than anything else.
Well, but
Like,
I thought that has been like literally blowing up in tensions over the past few years. Like, haven't there been conflicts where like Chinese warships have been in conflict in areas that they're not supposed to be? People aren't entirely sure like what to do about it right now.
Russia flies planes over Alaska like on like a monthly basis. Like, unfortunately, this kind of jingoism has existed.
Hold on,
around-
this is not even remotely close. We don't care about Russia flying planes in Alaska airspace. It's not like they're opening up trade routes or securing land doing it. They're not. Russia's not about to fight over sovereignty over property in Alaska, or if they are, I've never heard of this before. Whereas China
they're
does
not.
have a vested geopolitical interest in some of the seas, like south of their country.
I don't think it's in China's best interest to start a violent conflict. And further, there's like obviously.
Okay, wait.
Be
When we
prepared.
say violent conflict, nobody is like going to war. Okay,
Yeah.
it's more subversive. It's like when Estonia joins the United States and we set up missile defense platforms in their country. This
Yeah.
is the type of like military conflict I'm talking about. So it's not going to be China sends its warships out of the coast and starts
I agree.
blowing up, nuking like.
I agree. You're talking about like a conflict in China Sea. Like, if there's going to be a conflict South China Sea, it's going to be the People's Republic of China and America backing different political parties in the
Sure.
Philippines.
Or they're just going to have ships that they just like to float out in places. And hey, well, your ships are coming close to our ships. We told you to go away, and you're, initiating conflict. It's going to be like more gentle stuff like that that's going to escalate into little thing after little thing after little thing. It's not going to be like China like deploys its navy to go to war with somebody. It's going to be like their boats happen to be sitting out there. A radar, caught somebody incorrectly, and now a ship gets shot down. Like I feel like it's going to be more stuff like that.
I don't think that's going to be a big issue. Like, I think the reality is a lot of countries that have these large militaries are realizing that it's not necessarily they don't need them, but they're like a cost that make it harder to invest into welfare states, invest into enterprises that are more profitable and stuff like that. And I think that's going to be the focus for the long term. I think the big issue with China, compared like with an authoritarian state, you end up having to roll the dice whenever there's a transfer of power. Something goes wrong or someone isn't satisfied. That's the advantage America has over China.
Okay. What's your next pointer?
I think we did them all. I'm really surprised I don't think like if there's going to be a conflict of China, it's going to be purely economic. It's going to be purely economical.
I don't think I guess like I feel like these things are. It feels a little bit more complicated. Like when you say purely economic, nothing is purely economic, right? Like. I don't think the world is that simple anymore. It's not going to be purely economic. It's going to be economic that's going to be tied in with maybe some local conflict in some part of the world. It's going to be tied in with soft, diplomatic power being asserted over different trading blocks.
Cold War America versus the Soviet Union. Totally agree. And basically, the test is going to be is which neighboring countries to America and China are going to support the opposition. Like if Mexico starts thinking like China's really cool, then definitely I could see that as a possibility or something like that. Event but like right now, like the closest like a country of like real tight political support to America that is in like America's backyard is maybe Venezuela, maybe some trade ports in Europe. Like now, of course, things could change, but from everything I've seen and read, partially because like comparatively, like the conflict is still fresh on people's minds. Vietnam is still terrified they'll get annexed by China. Taiwan is still concerned they'll be annexed by China. North Korea and South Korea are both concerned they'll be annexed by China. India is concerned about the fight over the Himalayas. For that matter, Russia is concerned about a land war with China over the Siberia. America, I don't like Canadians, but I'm not super concerned Canada's going to side up with the Red Army. I'm not, and on top of that, I don't think Mexico can do it either. Now, things could change. Like, definitely you could see, like, the strange relationship that China has with Australia. That definitely could set the stage. But the reality is, I'm not super concerned about that. And part of that, completely honestly, based on, like, my perspective, my conversations, this is a big issue that China has. Like, still to this day, a lot of the European countries, a lot of the, quote, West, still incredibly racist when it comes to their opinions about non-white people. Well, man, like, unfortunately, even if China could offer a more peaceful, democratic, economically better opportunity to Canada. I think there are so many Canadians that don't like the Chinese government and the Chinese people from the People's Republic of China. Unfortunately, I don't think that would happen.
I mean, you say that, but China's still like buying up real. I mean, like Canadians can talk about how much they hate the Chinese.
Buying real estate, like that's billionaires buying like money laundering houses. Those houses.
No, these are legitimate Chinese foreign investment coming back in the form of trade deficits to balance the books as purchasing real estate and businesses in Canada and America. This isn't just one-off billionaires doing this. It's like a massive thing that is going on, like in all of North America.
But what's the strategic value of owning a suburb of Toronto or a suburb of Los Angeles?
What's the strategic value of controlling businesses and real estate across other countries?
It's not like they're buying a supermajority share in Apple or Microsoft.
Not yet, but that's not even true, because there are massive Chinese companies that are buying it. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at what just happened with TikTok. Like, the literal president of the United States is almost trying to expropriate this company because we're so worried that a Chinese majority-owned company is operating with such imprudency in the United States. Imprudently.
And it's the first and only tech company that isn't majority held by Americans to operate within the United States, and it's already on the decline. It's already being shit stained, and basically
it literally required presidential action to get them like changed. Like the president had to step in and say, "Hold on, we're getting fucked," and that was just over TikTok. That's not talking about Tencent and the ownership in companies that they're getting as well.
I believe in trade. If China owning a tech company in America prevents a hot war over some islands in the South Pacific, what's wrong with that?
The problem isn't that trade is bad. The problem is that we're not recognizing all of the power that power and influence China is now gaining and wields across the world that we're not ready to deal with.
So should America take, like, because understand, like, this isn't just like a private company. This is like, these companies have very unique relationships with the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. Should the United States government take a more active role in the management of it? You want the government to take a more active role in managing American tech companies and their relationship with foreign governments?
I want them to be more in terms of protecting American companies and in terms of guarding America's position economically around the world. Yeah, of course.
So
for instance, every single country in the world should be smacking China over their IP violations of the United States. That's never going to happen. We don't have the power alone to enforce it. We don't trust the WTO anymore, and we sure as fuck aren't working on multilateral trade agreements. Trump prefers bilateral. We don't have the power to pressure China out of their current practice in terms of violating American IP. That hurts our companies a lot.
I agree. But like, China doesn't have has like a TPP in like Europe or America. Like, this is purely just the Chinese.
I'm pretty sure China stepped in and had really large. What was the replacement for the TPP?
It was
the CPTPP.
Yes, yeah. But like, TikTok isn't a product of that. I'm talking specifically about how the government has relationships with private companies. Because, like, in my opinion, if we're talking about like not violent hot war, but like a more economic confrontation between America and China, I do think the American government and the American people democratically need to take a more active role in the management and control of American tech companies, American manufacturing companies, American energy companies. Effectively, like, the legacy of your argument is either we need to do Chinese-style state capitalism inside of America to build up these companies to more directly challenge China and its relationships with other countries, or we need to have a bidding war for the trade war.
No, what I'm saying is that the U.S. not that. I'm saying that the U.S. needs to recognize that it sits at top of like the U.S. hegemony of the world, that at one point in time that was our position. We need to remember why we were in that position. It seems like nowadays we think we were only there to just murder and kill people, and I guess that was the only point. That's what half of America thinks, that the U.S. saved the world, and the other half thinks that the U.S. just kills the world, and nobody really knows about the entire point of the influence we had in the world. That's just like, nobody cares about that. So we need to recognize that existed at one point in time, and then we need to like reassume that role if we want to have that role.
I don't think half the country thinks that like American foreign policy was just to kill people. I think maybe you could argue there's a radical amount like anti-foreign policy constituent or whatever. You could debate if that violence is necessary. But I don't think that this country thinks that American foreign policy is just there to kill people.
Well, it seems like we've forgotten like what the point of any U.S. foreign policy is. Trump sure as fuck doesn't understand. And I mean, like, every time we talk about foreign, I mean, I understand foreign policy is boring to most Americans, but
Well, part of this is like a lot of people. When I say this myself, someone who once believed this, like thought like you could get people to vote for foreign policy, and you can't because the reality is a significant portion of Americans are too poor to care about foreign policy. They're too like. So if we don't want people voting for Trump, what do we have to do? We don't
Appeal
want them.
on a non-foreign policy. I mean, whatever we talk about, it can't be foreign policy. But I mean, what do you mean? Right now, or what are you asking exactly?
If you want people to support global trade agreements,
Mm-hmm.
you need to give them buy-in.
Yeah, of
It's not
course. You have to
interesting.
account for losers more in global trade, for sure.
Yeah, well, specifically when it comes to just the practical politics of America, like this is my big issue when people talk about foreign policy or trade policy in America. They think, oh yeah, since we're in charge of America, it's just going to happen. Like, well, like because America is democracy, which I think is good, the American people have an input on this kind of thing, and if they don't feel like they're getting much benefit out of that, they're going to be opposed. I think a good comparison is Germany. The German people feel like whatever Germany does is good for the average German because the average German has economically benefited a lot over the past 2 decades. Now we could argue the average German has benefited a lot over the past 2 decades at the cost and loss of other people in Europe, but that separates the issue of the average German. So if you want Americans to feel like they have a buy-in, you need to provide them stuff. Whether we're talking about like, hey, Americans, look, we're going to do full trade policy. We're going to have nothing but consumption and intelligent and tech jobs in America, but everyone gets a college degree to compete in there. Like, that's how you get buy-in. It's the practical material conditions. The same way we go to Vietnam and say, hey, Vietnam, stay working with us. Don't side of China. We'll give you resources, and goods and services and trade to compete. And they'll be like, great, we love that. These material conditions have equal and opposite reactions. If you don't buy off the average American, they just go for Trump or the next Trump will be. Now, maybe we could argue if we corrected the system to be more democratic to actually say, like, hey, majority of Americans actually do benefit from trade, but not majority of the electorate. If we make the electorate more resemble the majority of Americans, maybe we don't need to worry about subsidizing American agriculture and Ford factories in the Midwest.
Okay, all right, we'll see. Anything else you got for me?
Look, man, I'm gonna keep hitting you until you come around in my argument that we need to get rid of the Electoral College and potentially talk about reforming the Senate and the Supreme Court. Like that's like this is something this is respectful disagreement. I hope you feel like this is coming. Honest discussion, not a like communism is best sort of thing. I hope you feel like this. I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you? I'm
no,
really
I don't think you ever. I wouldn't talk to you if I thought that you were just screaming at me in bad faith. I'm sure, of course not.
Well, I'm obviously not screaming loud enough then.
Yeah, maybe not.
I think I think democracy is good. Mm-hmm. I think the issue of American democracy is we don't have enough of it. The problem is we have an uncapped number. We've capped the number of representatives, which means that the lower house isn't representative of the American people. Mm-hmm. And because of this, the Senate holds supermajority control. Now, we can perform some things, but if our goal is to create a world that is more united by trade and that's more peaceful, that can counterbalance the anti-democratic forces in the world, primarily China, but there are other countries, we need to give the people who benefit from global trade more buy-in politically. And we do so by expanding the electorate, by giving them buy-in the trade policies, and that's it. If you don't, it's natural that someone like Trump would win eventually, in my opinion.
Sure. Okay. Well, hey,
any questions?
Doug from
any complaints?
California? Nope. I think I'm good. Give your final shout-outs to the people.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. You're wonderful as always.
Thanks. Have fun.
I enjoy these conversations.
Yep.
Hey, you too. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
Not everybody is born with a fucking silver spoon that can start 50 million fucking businesses. You don't think a lot of these small businesses are literally these people's livelihoods? What do you